Hey everyone, Coach Dave March here, and today we have a fantastic episode for the Growth Mindset podcast. Uh, we have Chris, which is building sales teams that generate anywhere from 10 million to 40 million dollars a year, leading teams that win. He's strategic, he's sharp, and I'm glad he's on the call. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
How you doing, everybody? My name is Chris Hyland. Been in sales now for a little over, 30 years almost. I got my start in the Air Force. I was a pilot. I was an aviator. Had a lot of fun, and then very quickly realized that I wanted a career in doing something else. So I happened to land in sales and figured out I was good at it. So I made it a career ever since. I've spent the last, like I said, 30 years driving sales cycles, leading sales teams, as well as building entrepreneurial startup companies. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, when you're good at something, it's a lot of fun. Like I think that's what it comes down to. Um, but I
Can
want
agree.
to dive into your background a little bit here. In the Air Force, it's pretty cool because first of all, not everybody gets enlisted into the Air Force, so I want to hear a little more about that.
All I ever wanted, well, I mean, I grew up in the 70s. I was a product of the 70s. So my favorite movie growing up was, well, I had two favorite movies, Patton and Star Wars. And so all I ever really wanted to do my whole life was fly X-Wing fighters. And didn't take long as I got older to realize that
Mhm.
that really is not an option. So I figured, well, let's try the next best thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be a pilot. That's all I ever wanted to be when I was a kid. So I made my way to the Air Force Academy. I got nominated, went through the congressional nomination process, the VP nomination process, got accepted, and I spent 4 years at the academy. And from there, I went to Euro NATO Joint Jet pilot training in Wichita Falls, Texas, and got to fly high performance aircraft, T-37s, T-38s.
Mm.
And unfortunately, there was a whole bunch of budget cuts at the time. So the Air Force was at 27 tactical fighter wings going to 41 when I started pilot training, and when I graduated, we were at 22 going to 18. So I ended up in flying military airlift, which was a C-141,
Mm.
which had the benefit, couldn't go upside down and do all, well, it could, you just didn't want it.
Yeah,
Didn't
yeah.
want it to. But I had the opportunity to see the world. I traveled all over the globe. I've continued to travel all over the globe in my career and in my personal life. So I've got to see some things that the vast majority of Americans who never exit our shores have gotten to see, and it's been amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And Patrick, I know
Yeah,
you've
I
had your
was just
time
gonna
there.
comment. Yeah, yeah, you said C-141 because we worked on C-130s. We got all the old stuff. Needless to say, the Marine was like the stepchild. We got the hand me down from every branch. Army, we got Army guns after, and our airplanes and our aircrafts a lot of time were hand me downs. But
Yeah, so
working on
C-141 looks just like a C-130, only bigger and with turbines instead of propellers.
okay,
And
got you.
so, here I am at the ripe age of 21, 22, 23, commanding a multi-million dollar aircraft with that much in cargo, flying around the world through, different, well,
Crazy.
called ADIZ, which is, air defense identification zones from country to country.
Mm.
Yeah, a
Um,
lot of firepower
and
there. Yeah, a lot of
yeah, well,
firepower.
when I was in, we were bringing everybody home from the first Gulf War. So I spent a lot of time, we called it downrange, but in the desert, in the sandbox,
In the box, in
bringing
the
people
sand.
home.
Yep. Building
Yeah,
sand castles all day. Man,
yeah, and
I didn't get to go across seas. I was crazy enough, I got enlisted like June 6th of 2001, and I graduated September 7th. Then 9/11 happened, and it was like, oh my, of all times for me to join the military was like wartime. But they ended up having us pretty much spend most of our time stateside helping out in California as we brought aircrafts, basically doing 16-hour shifts for like months,
Mhm.
taking care of birds. So yeah, I didn't get to play in the sandbox. Some of my friends did, but yeah, I was stateside the whole time.
As a Marine, it's probably better for you.
Yeah,
yeah,
life expectancy. I'm glad to be here.
yeah.
That's all I'm saying. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Awesome. Yeah, and so yeah, I mean, all the skills and the leadership and all these things that you've gained through that whole experience, you can also bring now towards companies as you've grown companies tremendously with your sales leadership. And so talk to me a little bit more about, what it was like, to really build these big giant organizations, build these sales teams that were able to, eventually grow the company either, 5,000% in one of the companies you had, or, things like that.
Well, I mean, leadership is really, I find it to be the mesh, the melding point between interpersonal relationship capability and essentially engineering, which is, problem solving, critical thinking. And I learned a lot of that interpersonal skill in the Air Force at the Air Force Academy, where, my first real leadership opportunity was leading a group of 1,500 people through basic training. And I had a staff of 30. So here I am, essentially a junior in college. I've got a staff of 30, and we are responsible for the training of, the new freshmen in basic. And so, we have performance metrics that they have to hit because of, our influence, and we're responsible for getting them to do things they really don't want to do. So you meld that in a commercial environment with problem solving, with critical thinking, with, how do I manage constraints? That engineering mindset. And when you bring those two together, that's really what allows successful leadership. There are people who skew one way or the other. They skew all interpersonal, and they can be successful, but I don't think you can be as successful as someone who can bring both of those to bear. So my operations research aeronautical engineering background, along with applied math, and then just doing that in the Air Force, problem solving, constant, what is the solution? I love the movie The Martian, not only because it's funny, but what he says there, you just have to do the math. You solve one problem, and then you solve the next problem, and then you solve the next problem. And sometimes the problem that you solve now leads to 3 other problems. Okay, well, you just keep chugging away at solving those problems. So in a sales environment, you start by, hey, we have nobody. We've got to build a team. All right. So we're hiring, we're recruiting, and then we use feedback loops based on who we hired over the last 6 months. How are they being successful? How are they doing? All right, well, what did we notice? What are some lessons that we can learn? What are some traits that we can look for, in the next round? And then going from problem to problem. Okay, we've got a team. All right, we're not generating top of funnel. Okay, why? Why are we not generating top of funnel? Well, it's easy to just say, well, sales reps aren't doing anything. Well, wait a minute. Top of funnel is a coordinated team effort that goes company wide. It's a combination of brand building. It's a combination of marketing. It's a combination of lead gen. It's a combination of, sales rep personal outreach and sales rep follow-up. It's a combination of, partner driven activities. So how do we mesh all of those together to drive top of funnel, and what's failing? Being able to look at metrics, being able to look at KPIs and understand, okay, here's where we expect things to be. They're not there. Okay, that gives us a lever to pull. Same thing when, all right, I've got top of funnel. I've got mid funnel. All right, where we're not closing. Okay, well, let's look at our sales reps. Let's look at our team. Where are they failing? Because not everybody's the same. I mean, I've had sales reps that were phenomenal at driving top of funnel, but where they started to fail was when they got into sort of the middle of the sales cycle, the requirements generation, the discovery calls, depending on the moniker that different companies use. And I find that sales are won and lost in that middle phase. That's where you really sell your product. That's where you allow the customer in their own mind to equate your capabilities with their needs. And that process of uncovering their needs and, putting a mirror in front of their face and helping them to see, this is your need, this is your pain, and then essentially being the consultant that helps them see this capability in my solution matches with this need, and they make that bridge. You don't make it for them. But in being able to do that effectively, that's where the sale really happens. The rest of it is generally risk avoidance, negotiating price. Am I making the right decision? It's them justifying logically what they feel emotionally.
Love it. Love it.
Nice.
Yeah. And it's huge. It's huge stuff. Specifically, I know that you've been instrumental in landing some real complex accounts that, were sort of like a mouth problem that you had to go through. For example, DFW Airport, you worked with Appian there. Talk about like the strategy you used, because I know you really killed it there.
So DFW is an interesting animal because they're not a government agency. They're not a private corporation. They are both. They are a municipality. They are a quasi-government organization because they're an airport authority, but they're also a private corporation. They're not your typical, let's say, East Coast Airport Authority, which essentially sits under the auspices of a city or a state. DFW is its own entity. It has its own board. It has private enterprises that it owns that generate what they call private revenue, as well as it is the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport Authority. And so they operate under a quasi-government charter between both cities. So they have their own personal board that has basically regulators, overseers within the two cities. And then between those three, they are actually generating the other side of their revenue, which is the public revenue side, which is the landing fees that they charge airlines that drive their public revenue. And the way they've sequestered that is landing fees and everything on that side drives what they call OpEx. And because they own 3 hotels, all the parking, everything is owned by the airport corporation, that drives CapEx. And so you've got 2 sequestered buckets of money, but you've got a fairly constant turnover of executives because they're appointed. So when I rolled in, the previous CIO who had kind of helped Appian get their foot in the door was out. And so they had appointed a new CIO. He was coming from not government, he was coming from private enterprise. And so he rolled in and he was bringing with him a complete Salesforce mindset. Salesforce.com could do everything. Salesforce.com was the best CRM system. And Salesforce was in their mode of pushing what they called Force.com. So Force.com was a direct competitor to Appian. We got our start in BPM, business process management. That morphed over years of product development and a lot of innovation into what Appian had become, which was a low-code app development platform. The ability to drag and drop widgets and create applications without writing JavaScript or C++ or anything like that. So we were competing there. And it was my job really to convince the CIO, to put it bluntly, that Appian was the answer to his prayers and Salesforce was the devil. But that was a much harder road to climb because Salesforce was embedded in DFW. DFW had 8 different business units. Each one of them had a different CRM system. 2 of them were running on Salesforce, and Salesforce was in there saying, well, we'll just run everything on Salesforce. It'll be easy. It'll be great. And we were saying, no, it's not that easy. And they were also saying we could build all your other apps. So we had to position Appian with certain key strengths that we had that Salesforce did not have, which at the time were not important necessarily to the board or to the CIO. The biggest one was Appian's security capabilities and Appian's multi-tenant architecture. We had developed that because our biggest customer from a revenue perspective was the federal government. So we had all of our security certifications. We were DoD certified, we were FedRAMP, and these may mean nothing to some of your viewers, but to anybody who's dealt in government sector, all of these were extremely important. And so we had those, and we had a multi-tenant architecture where Salesforce is what's called single tenant, meaning everybody's on the same set of hardware. It's a giant server pool and everybody's on the same stuff. It all fails over. It all meshes. We were multi-tenant, meaning when you spun up an Appian solution, you had your own set of virtual hardware in the cloud. And we could do, AWS, Azure, all the above. That was irrelevant. So while we were going through our sales process, we had invited the CIO and his team to our annual users conference. They had accepted because they were going through this drive to let's figure out what our development platform of the future is going to be. And as we led up to that conference, he was going to go to Dreamforce. And he was about 2 weeks out from going to Dreamforce when Salesforce had a major failure. They were down for 72 hours and they lost a whole bunch of client data. And so I, of course, scheduled a meeting 2 days after that. I'm like, hey, I'm going to just happen to be at DFW that day. Didn't, just a coincidence. And so we got to sit down. I had lunch, and he said, Chris, this is no big deal. He said, I'm going to Dreamforce in 2 weeks. I'm going to ask them. They're going to tell me how they've figured out how to mitigate all this. It's going to be great. I'm like, okay. I said, just be careful because they're never going to leave their multi-tenant architecture. And Force.com is on the same architecture that Salesforce is. So he goes, and I don't hear anything of it because our conference was like a week later. So I meet him in DC, and he comes up to me. We start having drinks, and he said, Chris, the funniest thing happened in San Francisco. I said, what's that, Steve? He said, well, I asked, Salesforce, I said, this was bad, but he said, I trust you guys. How do you plan on mitigating this? And they're like, we don't. Yeah, everybody's happy. Yeah, we're a CRM system. It's not like we got mission critical data. You can replace all that. And he looked at me and he said, Chris, we are planning on mission critical ops applications. I said, well, let's sit down and talk about what our mitigation strategy is, what our failover strategy is, and how we can guarantee you 99.999% uptime with no greater than a 2 hour, mean time to discovery and no less than a 6 hour mean time to recovery on your critical apps.
Perfect.
Next thing we knew, we had what led to 2 transactions totaling for DFW Airport in excess of software and services of, when you take them over 5 years, almost $20 million. One of the largest transactions, in Appian history at the time. It was fantastic. And so we got a reference client. We got someone who hosted reference visits for years to come for us. It was great. It was a lot of fun. To be able to navigate that, those issues and those problems, and use, what you can't expect, the thing that it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to it.
Exactly. Never let a disaster go to waste.
That's right.
It worked in your favor like you was talking about how we bridged the gap at the end of the sale where the client had to bridge the gap of saying that what we have is what you need. And I highlighted the issue, the problem, because you were already with the defense, with the government. So your level of security blew your competition out of the water. And when they didn't plan to mitigate the issue that happened it was a no-brainer. It wasn't hard.
Well, and it was fantastic because that led to another transaction, which was totally unrelated, at Ericsson, because they're just down the street from each other. Obviously, Ericsson is headquartered in Kista, Sweden, right? That's 6,000 miles away. But their North American headquarters is not more than 30 minutes away. And so when we started engaging them on an application, we were able to walk them down to DFW and show them how in our one of the second applications we built, we replaced all of their CRM systems. They had 8 of them. And we replaced them with one CRM system that behaved 8 different ways because it's a build to fit for purpose, build to suit application that's fully integrated across all business units. We built one CRM application that had different business processes and different fields for every single business unit. So 80% of it was core the same. It was the other 20% that varied from business unit to business unit. So no longer did they have, because they had a unit that was, a sales unit that went out to other markets. They flew to Poland, they flew to Romania, they flew overseas, trying to entice airlines to, run routes to DFW.
Okay.
Well, once they got an airline that said, okay, yeah, this looks good, DFW is a market for us, then that got handed off to another unit, which handled, contracts, and it handled things like, well, what kind of resources do you need? Do you need a jetway? Do you need a specific kind of jetway for a specific size airplane? Do you want physical assets, or are, at the time it was plasma screen TVs that we can, change the software on. So, at 10 o'clock, it's, Etihad Airways, and at 2 o'clock when your plane shows up, it's ABC Airlines.
Gotcha.
So all those are the 8 different business units. And so when we started talking to Ericsson, they needed something that was fully integrated across multiple systems, because they had to, based on European Union new laws that passed, they had to red thread every transaction from initial pre-sales to quote to order to invoice to shipment. And they had no way to do that because everything was on multiple systems.
Yeah.
And so we had to be able to red thread that, and to do it in a very fast, efficient manner without, because they couldn't, they were on SAP. They're never going to change that. They were on several other subsystems that they were never, ever going to change. But they had to be able to, basically walk this all the way through for regulators, so that regulators could look and go, okay, that product there was on that sales order. It was on that delivery order. It's on that quote. And, oh, by the way, it may have 4 different part numbers because it's got 4 different part numbers in 4 different systems. So it wasn't like it was easy. Like, here's a SKU number,
Yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's got a lot of different pieces to it. And I think that that's not easy. We're not talking about like simple sales here. I think that needs to be getting across here.
Yeah.
Where you shine, Chris, is in these complex sales situations where there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of different moving parts, and we're making big money. We're not talking about small potatoes here in terms of the sales. We're talking about $20 million, talking about like $10 million. I mean, typical quotas that you have on a year, Chris, is what, $1 million to $5 million in a year?
Typical ARR is $1 million. Yeah.
Wow.
And most software companies, $1 million to $1.2 million. Yeah. Typical ARR, annual recurring revenue.
Yeah. So this are big things. And, what I'm curious about, Chris, is how you build up that high performance sales culture. Because I know you've led teams that are ranging from, $1 million to $2 million, where the reps are doing that, and so how do you keep that high performance standard across your reps?
It really comes down to, I mean, I don't subscribe completely to the Jack Welch philosophy of, cut the bottom 30% every year. But I do ascribe to the fact that you have to understand what your team is, what its makeup is, what are they good at? And that varies person to person. So it was actually at Epicor, but it went through multiple changes. I got hired when it was Profit 21, and we bought 7 companies, and we grew by acquisition as well as organic. And then we merged with Activent, and then Activent got bought by Epicor. So when it was Epicor, I was tasked with, because I was closing our biggest deals, I helped us take, a software that was designed for distributors at the time that were doing, 20, 30, $40 million a year. And I was selling it into much larger distributors and manufacturers that were upwards of 100, 200, 300 million a year. And it's because I had complex sales experience even before I got to Epicor. And so they asked me, they said, Chris, we want to build out a team that does this. So I said, sure, this is what we need. I need people like me who understand our software, understand our product, but I need to be able to interview them to understand, can they navigate not just I talk to the CEO or the president, because a lot of times they weren't called CEOs, right? I go to the president of ABC, electric distributor, and I convince him to buy our software. So I've got to, in our interview process, be able to understand, can someone multi-thread a sales cycle and talk to the VP of this department and the VP of that department and the director of this department, and get the 3 of them to go to the CEO and say, this is the software we need. This is why we need it. Because a lot of times these might not be, I mean, it's easy if somebody's decided we're changing software. But most of our goal was to convince somebody to do something they really did not want to do because nobody wanted to implement new software. Hell no. I mean, talk about, let me generally stick a gun to my head and pull the trigger in terms of cost, in terms of effort, right? Everybody wants to get to the other side, but that journey is extremely difficult. And so we had to convince them to undertake something that they maybe necessarily hadn't budgeted for. So we had to convince them to undertake the budget, undertake the effort based on what we could achieve on the back end. So I started by hiring internally. And I went through all of our reps and I basically sat down with each one of them and we figured out a team. Initially it was 8 and then it went to 10 that I was pulling in and I was building the team from scratch. And so I basically walked them through a lot of my transactions and, where we won, where we lost, why, what we could have done different, what the success characteristics were. And in that first year, so I hired the team, I built the team, I worked with marketing in terms of specific marketing focuses, some collateral, some, pre stuff, some leave behind, some specific, account-based marketing activities to get us into certain places. So I coordinated all of that along with our reps. And they were carrying at the time, because we sold software and services, it was kind of a combination. They were carrying, essentially $2 million quotas. And in that first year, I was able to get every single rep to achieve quota plus, which I thought was, that was my moniker for success, was if I can make these guys successful, if I can help them to understand how to navigate these sales cycles, and I can teach them how to fish, so that I'm there, to build relationships. I'm there because I can lend, sometimes you're talking with people that they want a title. They want to talk to a title. Okay, fine. I'm the title. That guy's the expert on your account. But if you want a title, here I am. And be a title, frankly, that doesn't screw things up, because I had plenty of those.
Yeah, that's actually a really big point too, because if you're the title that screws things up, it's like you're just going around just you flashing your title and doing all that kind of stuff. That's
everybody's work.
That could really. There's a skill to that.
Well, it's skill and preparation. The NFL is, replete with people who they were talented as, amazing talented athletes, and they got by on talent in college or high school and college even. But then they got to the pros and they realized, no, the guy who doesn't watch film hours on hours a day, the one that doesn't prep, will only go so far on talent. And so as a leader, before any meeting that I had that was client facing, I would sit with my team member, my rep, and understand, okay, what is driving this account and why? What is their compelling event? What is their lack of a compelling event? What's their pain? Tell me all the personalities that are involved. Give me as much information, in a short amount of time as you can. And then it was a matter. So that was the prep. The talent was, I knew how to sell in general, but also the talent was understanding our product, what our capabilities were, having that on the tip of my tongue. Because I remember one instance when I was still, a rep, when I was still an individual contributor, we had bought, this was back when we were Profit 21, we had bought a company. We had bought an electrical software company, and their CEO basically came over as he started as a strategic advisor, but then he became a regional VP, right? They basically gave him a title and said, go manage some people and you'll be fine. You'll get a salary. So, I didn't need anybody at the time. I was the highest performing rep in the company. And so I'm going on a sales cycle. I'm there with our technical pre-sales, our sales engineer, and Dean wants to come along. All right, fine, show up. And so he comes in, for the most part, he was fairly quiet. He's just kind of sitting there, and that was great. I didn't need him to pipe up at all. Well, at one point, the customer asks a question. I'm not going to get the specifics of the question, but there's an intuitive knowledge, there's an intuition, there's an empathy to understand, okay, the question that they asked is not really the question here's the answer that they need. Here's the shortest avenue to answer this question, to get them over that hump and to move on from something that, that it could potentially be an area of risk for us, right? And so as I'm about to give that answer and move us down the road, he picks this moment to chime in. and he starts going down a road of, because they were asking about certain back-end systems and, operating systems and whatnot. And he starts talking about Citrix and other things. And I'm like, okay, how do I interrupt this as politely as possible?
Without undermining
Do
my
I
boss.
kick the table and spill a drink? What do I
Yeah,
do?
like
Oh, sorry. Oh, so sorry. Oh, is that ketchup? Oh, my bad.
So finally,
I didn't mean to get that ketchup on you.
so finally, I'm like, hey, Dean, hey, thanks so much for that. Really appreciate that. It's a lot of great information. Guys, let me repeat your question. This is what you're asking, correct? Yes. Okay. Here's our answer. And I had a polite way to basically shut him up. So, but somebody who wasn't as experienced, who had a leader come in and do that, could have derailed, and maybe we wouldn't have lost that deal, but they could have derailed it to the point that it's delayed. Now we've got to go through, another demo specifically to talk about this. We've got to go through some risk mitigation conversations about this. It puts questions in their head. So it's that the talent of having the intuition, the product knowledge, and layering on top of that, the preparation, the film study of what is behind this account and where are we at, so that when I'm sitting with one of my guys in front of a customer, I'm adding value. And then after that, really the management comes down to understanding each individual team player. What are they good at? What are they not good at? Where do they need help? Where do they need my support? And then where do they need my management, right? Because it might be that, again, somebody's great at top of funnel. They're fantastic in the middle, right? Or they're good enough, but deals are falling off at the end. Okay, well, let's go on sales cycles. Let me watch, understand what you do. Let me observe, let me come back. And now we can teach, because I don't want to fire 30%. The training cost is too high. The ramp up is too long. It's way too expensive. I need to be able, as a leader, to turn C players into B players, B players into, A minus players. And I need to, while doing that, find my A plus, my first round talent that then I can help groom into, because the A plus player has to be born, right? The Patrick Mahomes, the superstar quarterback has to have that talent in his arm, in his legs, and in his head. You cannot simply teach that. You can groom it, you can make it more effective, but he's got to have that talent. To be an A plus player, you've got to have that talent. But if I can take the B plus and turn him into an A minus, and the B and turn him into a B plus, and the C and turn him into a B, and then I'm only managing out your D and F players. Okay, they were bad hires. Sucks, happens. Oh well, right? Now I'm managing out 10% of my team. I can make up for that, in overage. I can make up for that in bench. There's lots of ways to then drive a high-performing sales engine that continually produces revenue and does not go on a sine curve like most sales organizations do. But you're up and down and up and down and up and down.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm gonna say I am completely impressed with the attention to detail, because that was something we always stress: attention to detail of how each part of it you gave extra thought to making sure that everything was done. Like you were talking about threading things through and walking it through. I think that's an amazing part. A lot of times, like when I used to work at, it was a call center, nothing big, but sometimes the marketing department were highlighting things that they wanted us to sell, but that wasn't the best selling point of what we were selling. And that kind of, well, I don't have the authority to tell them, hey, why don't we kind of like highlight this part of the product? Because that's more what the customer is calling about, but you're pushing this part of the product and no one really cares. And you're giving us sales pitches to push that. And it's like, they're not, asking for it. So the fact that you looked at the whole process and able to rearrange things from top to bottom, it's like, yeah, it's very impressive, and I like hearing about it. So yeah.
Well, in today's day and age, the old methods of selling are no longer functional, right? The idea that, the old used car salesman, right, where you can convince somebody to buy, that's gone out the window. Today's buyer, especially in commercial enterprises, and especially in enterprise level sales, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 1000, they're far too, intellectual. They're far too educated to buy into this. We have to as salespeople nowadays, right? It's the consultative sale, it's the challenger sale, whatever you want to call it. It's the ability to align with the buyer's process and being able to align your solution with what the buyer is looking for. As someone, I've been through multiple, sales training, sales methodologies, solution selling. I've been through that entire program. I've been through the TAS, target account selling. And then most recently, command of the message. And command of the message is all about what you were talking about, which is the fact that, marketing and product management may have some things that they think are awesome. Yep. The customer doesn't think they're awesome. The prospect doesn't necessarily think they're awesome, or they don't think they're as awesome as something else, or it's the way we're presenting. And so what command of the message really prompts you to do, and I thought it was an excellent, use of a couple of weeks of time spread out with our team, was being able to align certain capabilities and even strategic differentiators with messages that resonated with the client, with the prospect, things that they were looking for, but putting it in terms that they could understand and that would drive them to action. So it wasn't just the capability of the strategic differentiator. Those were great. It was the command of the message. What is the message to the prospect? How do I get the prospect on board with this particular item, this particular facet of our solution is something that you really need or you really want? And that's an extremely valuable exercise, because you're right. Sometimes, marketing or some other element of the organization wants you to drive this, but that's not, resonating with the client. It's not producing actionable results. And so that's where really a sales leader needs to understand, needs to be able to work with marketing, with product management, with the executive team, and then use that and amalgamate those messages and then disseminate them through my particular team or team of teams so that they can have a consistent, beneficial message to customers and prospects as to why certain aspects or facets are something that they should look at. And that's where command of the message I thought was very helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's amazing. I can't speak to a command of the message, having never taken that sales training, but what I can speak to is the idea of cross-functional collaboration, getting the different leaders involved, getting different departments involved, because as your leader, Chris, you're not just working with the sales, you're working with the other departments as well. And like you're saying, creating a consistent and aligned message throughout the organization that we're all going to kind of sing the same song, if you will.
Sing the same song, but and each play our part, right? Especially in technology sales and enterprise sales, it's a team effort, it's a team sport. Right. There's no one sales rep that's going to go out there and really be able to consistently drive value and revenue unless they do it as part of a team. And that team is the sales rep. The team is the other members of the sales team. That team is marketing. That team is technical pre-sales. That team is, professional consulting, if that's part of your organization, or if you're using partners like, SIs or, the big six firms or whoever it may be. And as well as executives, because the executives have a part to play and they have a message to drive, and it's something that only they can do, right? There is an absolute time when in dealing with enterprises, I want the COO, I want the CEO, I want the VP of sales, I want the chief technology officer in a meeting with that customer talking about certain specific things that they will only receive from the CIO or the CTO or the CEO. Right? When we're talking to product management, okay, here's our roadmap. Hey, there are 3 features that you really, really, really want that are not part of our system yet, but here's a roadmap to get us there. That'll be there in a certain amount of time. But you don't want to hear that from me, the VP, whether I'm VP of sales, regional VP, or you don't want to hear it from the sales rep. You want to hear that from the director of product management, the director of product engineering, the chief technology officer. You want to hear it from someone whose throat you can choke, 6 months or a year from now. It's not happening. And getting that comfort level, bringing the whole team to bear in an enterprise sale is what gets you over the finish line.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Look, when it comes down to it, that's what it all comes down to. You really have to work together as a team, for the strategic growth, and for the account expansion. And when it comes down to the hiring of things, I think you did have some great things to say there as well. You're able to coach them, able to lead them through. Um, is there any kind of philosophy around pipeline generation, ensuring that each person is accountable for their activities? Is there any ideas around there?
No, there's lots of it. So everybody has to take the effort, right? You have to produce top of funnel. Without top of funnel, nothing's going anywhere. Sales still at its core is a numbers game. If you have 10 prospects and you can close, and you can get 5 of them, into a sales cycle, and you can get 3 of them, deep into a sales cycle, and you can close 1 or 2 of them, depending on the size of your deals. The math always maths, right? Going back to the Martian example, do the math. If the math is not working from an upfront top of funnel situation, you'll never make it at the bottom. So the sales, your individual team members are responsible for, typically, depending on the organization, a certain percentage of their own sales funnel, their own top of funnel. The rest should be a function of marketing, of lead gen, of existing sales to existing customers, those sorts of things. So when I'm looking for reps, right? So you have to manage that. That is something that is just pure management. Are you doing the work? Are you putting in, the 5 extra phone calls a day, right? Are you putting in the 5 phone calls at 4:55 when decision makers may actually pick up their phone? Are we doing the work to map sales organizations and reach out to, multi tiers within the organization to try to get a meeting and then turn that meeting into, an up-level meeting, those sorts of things. When I'm looking for sales reps, one of the traits that I look for, beyond all of the, okay, what's on their resume and do they talk well and all that, but every NFL team or every team in general, they kind of have this is their model, right? Some NFL teams, they love to take, mid-market school tackles and turn them into guards. For those of you who understand that analogy, right? And it works for them, right? Because they know what traits to look for. I look for, one of the things I want to see in a rep, I need to have somebody who understands sales instinct. They have the instincts. They can talk, right? They don't get tongue-tied. They don't get afraid, nervous, that sort of thing. But I think the most important thing when I look for sales reps is just what I call grinders. Because in that top of funnel activity, it's a lot of grinding, right? And I apologize. We just had the NFL draft, so I have a lot of NFL analogies, and I'm a fan too. But the guy who's not going to watch 4, 5, 6 hours of film a day, the guy who's not going to go work on his craft, the wide receiver who's not going to go practice routes without anybody else on the field. He's going to set up a video camera. He's going to time himself. He's going to look at his routes. Am I dropping my hips? How fast am I getting in and out of breaks? Those sorts of things. The rep that I look for is one that is willing to be a grinder at the top of funnel. Do they have the sales instinct and the polish to go from middle, from top to middle to close? Great. That's talent. But I need someone who's willing to put in the work at the grind level. The 5 extra phone calls, the 5 extra emails, right? The 5 extra LinkedIn requests, calling partners. Hey, do you have anything for me? Let's meet. Let's sit down. Let's have lunch. Who are you working with? How can I help? The grinding activity that drives top of funnel that ultimately determines success.
Yeah, I mean, just fantastic. And, also kind of behind what you're saying, I'm also hearing, someone that's reflective, someone that can reflect on what they're doing, like you're saying with the hips, someone that's intrinsically motivated, that wants to do these things without pressure from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Those are those are all key pieces, real key pieces, in terms of
Exactly.
hiring. So yeah, I think that's right on board. Um,
And it's
so
finding those people and developing a culture that does that, that a culture that not just mandates it, that's not just stick, but a culture that rewards that, a culture that makes that in some cases even a fun activity, right? We introduce competition into it. We give out silly things, prizes, right? We go on trips together. Those sorts of things that make some of this enjoyable, or to a certain extent enjoyable when it's not an enjoyable activity. But that helps drive that activity. It creates a culture that encourages that, that rewards that. That's how you go from I'm managing a sales team to I am leading a high performance, year in, year out revenue generating engine that the company looks at and says, okay, leave them alone because whatever they're doing, they're working. Or they're sending people to me going, what are you doing that the rest of our guys aren't, right? What are you
yeah,
doing in the Midwest that the East is not doing? Right? Can you take this to our European team? Absolutely. Because none
yeah,
of this,
yeah,
it's not rocket science.
yeah. I mean, yeah, you want to get to a point where people want to clone you, essentially. That's kind of the
Yes.
idea here.
Work your way out of a job. That's the best thing you can do because there's always another one to be had. One higher up.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. Yeah. And so, as we kind of start to close this episode down here, um, I would like to kind of ask you just a couple questions um, on really the organizational fit for you. When you've done a lot of great work for these companies, and I know some companies you've grown them by thousands of percent. Um, what what kind of environment, what type of company really is one where you see yourself as the best fit for?
I mean, as sometimes as painful it is, I love the startup environment. I think it's a lot of fun. Your teams are generally smaller, so you get to know everybody better as opposed to being in a 3,000 4,000 person organization. I've worked with both, and when I get into very large organizations, I try to make them small by meeting everybody that I possibly can. And I'm not adverse to travel, so I mean, I will. There are times when I've told people, look, I need to get on a plane and go meet so and so at a particular office. They're not customers, they're internal people. Because I need to get face to face with somebody and we need to sit down and talk. We need to build a rapport and a relationship so that we can be more effective together moving forward. But I love the Series B, Series C, Series D companies, right? We're not bleeding edge. We're not three people trying to, get something off the ground, but we're 30, 40, 50, 100 people that are taking it to the next level. Because I can absolutely, I think where I thrive is in taking that company from startup mode into we're in replicating growth mode. I do that extremely well. So I love those types of companies. Uh, you know, I I thrive on opening new markets. Recently in a consulting engagement, right, I helped a Canadian company, open their U.S. market, helped get them embedded with SAP, with partners down here. Drive the opening of new customers and new revenue lines. I've helped companies get started in Europe as well, which is a lot of fun. I love travel, so that's kind of the ideal company for me, where I can help, be one of those initial, team leaders that we then begin to grow into multiple teams, and we can inculcate a culture that becomes a revenue producing mindset.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. So now if there's a CEO here that's listening to this episode and they're in a spot where they're hiring, um, two things. How would they be able to contact you? Is there LinkedIn you have? And what would you want them to know about you as a sales leader in a few seconds if they wanted to, hire you?
They can absolutely contact me via LinkedIn. Feel free to share my contact info with anybody, who you deem appropriate. They can call me. That's no problem. As a sales leader, I'm the guy on a 30, 60, 90-day plan. I make it my business in the first 30 days, meet everybody, get eyeball to eyeball across a table, across a meal with everybody on my team, understand what their personal motivations are, understand as much as I can in a short period of time what their personal history is, where they've been successful, where they haven't been successful. In that 30 days, I'm meeting everybody I can in the organization. Again, if I can, I'll get face to face with somebody, or at least on a video call. Build that rapport. In the 60 days, I'm watching every single rep, understanding now from an objective perspective, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses, right? They may think they're great at top of funnel, but I'm watching them now and no, you're not so great. So how do we coach that? Or you're not so great at negotiation. How do we coach that? And so then I can begin to understand, where my team's strengths and weaknesses are, where I can add value in terms of mentoring, coaching, player coaching, where I can show up on sales calls and I can actually help, right? I can help with that particular portion of the sales cycle until I can teach somebody how to do it better. So we can still maintain revenue, right? I can be a closer if I have to. If a certain rep isn't quite there yet, but we can teach them how to do that. And then in the 90 days, I'm figuring out what do I need to do to take this team to the next level. Now that I've observed everybody, now that I understand where they're at, where I need to teach, where I need to mentor, or where I need to manage someone out of the team and replace them, I've begun that process of constantly recruiting, constantly reaching out, constantly building a bench so that we don't ever miss a beat. And then looking at the overall organization and finding out, again, from a constraints management, from a critical thinking, from an engineering mindset, how is it that we solve the problems, in the company? Where do we get rid of friction, right? So we can actually do this better and more efficiently.
Love it.
Nice.
I love it. Yeah. Anything else you want to ask, Patrick?
Yeah. Sorry. My camera, my call got off a little bit, but I would like to say that just from listening to you, I have gained a lot more insight on, I mean, everything is sales. No matter what business you're in, if you can't sell your product, I don't care how good your product is. So the advice that you gave and the information that you gave today is helping me personally because I do music and I'm as a band,
Mhm.
and it just gave me another idea to look at music in the product of finding the venue that needs what I have, as opposed to knocking on every door and saying, "Hey, I got music, I got a band." Now it's more canvassing who the pain point, who has a venue that doesn't get a lot of customers due to the fact they have no entertainment, and
Mhm.
then sell myself as the answer to your problem because I can get your bar bringing more, more revenue from the bar just by having my band here. So
Exactly.
it's giving me another perspective on when I'm going out beating the streets for, music gigs. So I really appreciate the information is what I'm
And
saying.
then just use data. So when you get one of those first gigs, say, hey, what was the cash intake before? What was the cash
And
intake
what is it
after? And
after?
tell me.
And then I can use, and that's a portfolio. So
Yep,
I can start
exactly.
using that as, yeah. So yeah, you've given me a analytical way to go about it because a lot of times when you're a musician, you just think, hey, we play music, you should hire us. We're good.
Yep.
But coming at it from an analytical way of being able to talk bottom line and how we can increase revenue in your business always wins bigger than my band really rocks. So I appreciate it.
You got it.
Totally. Totally. Well, I think we're going to sign off here on the Growth Mindset podcast. Thank you so much, Chris. We really
Appreciate it.
appreciated you. Yeah, on the call today and just on the episode. I think we both learned a lot. And as a parting phrase, I will say, never give up and keep fighting forward.
You got it. You
Yeah.
too.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye
guys.
bye.
Yeah.